You never know who is suicidal unless you ask and unless you talk to people. Hello, my name's Gary. From Shout, and I'm one of the safeguarding leads and suicide prevention people there. I also work as a clinical supervisor supporting volunteers and texters on the platform.
Great. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Gary.
That's all good. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I just want to, for context of how this conversation came about, I just want to read the email that I sent to Shout, which is the crisis text line that you work for and that I used to volunteer for at some point. Okay, so this is what I said. I said that I have this podcast, which is set up in part to provide you are not alone type genuine conversations for listeners who get to hear personal stories of everyday people overcoming adversity. In the introduction episode, I talk about how I wanted to make the type of conversation my brother could have listened to give him hope that there's a way through the dark depths of depression. He took his life 11 years ago. The first feedback I got on this episode was someone saying they'd also experienced suicide ideation, but not making a plan or whatever. I immediately thought of my Shout volunteer training and the ladder up assessment. I realized that I must make an episode where I explain how this works so listeners who may be uncomfortable or anxious hearing about suicide become better educated, not to mention better able to assist others who may be struggling in their lives. My next thought was, of course, better than me explaining it, why not get someone on from Shout to do it? So, and then Shout sent me you. So I'm so happy to be chatting and to be, learning directly from you. But this podcast is called Growing Up. Before we get into all of that, I wanted to first ask what growing up was like for you.
I guess growing up, I'd like to think I had quite a happy childhood. It was me, my mum, my dad, and my sister mainly. But we grew up in a multi-generational household, so I had my grandparents living with me, I had an aunt living with me for a number of years, and come from quite a big family, and I would say we are really close. So childhood's involved spending a lot of time with family members, going to lots of different houses, and generally speaking, I would say it was quite a happy one where we went on holidays abroad, went to visit family in India quite often, or a couple of times I reckon. And then I hit teenage years and I started to rebel. Done all the usual things, staying out late, partying, giving my parents a absolute nightmare. Just generally being a bit of a terror as a lot of teenagers do. So I wouldn't say I did anything exceptionally silly, but just rebelled mainly. So in that sense, I'll say I was quite lucky, and I think my parents tried to provide us, both me and my sister, with everything that they could. So if we ever wanted anything, they'd work hard, do take extra shifts at work, and do a lot of overtime so me and my sister wouldn't have to go without. So I guess I'm eternally grateful for that, and they just instilled that in my life. And I have to say that me and my sister are quite close. I'm quite close to my parents. We don't live near each other, but speak to each other every week on the phone, speak to my sister a couple of times a week, and just try and be in each other's lives as much as we can.
And did you, because you're in the north of England now, right? We're doing this remotely. But whereabouts did you grow up?
I grew up in London, northwest London, just a place called Harrow, so it's just around the corner from Wembley. That's where most people recognise in London, so that's how I try to highlight it. But so to be fair, London was a great place to grow up because it just has everything there. It's all on your doorstep. Whether you access it or not is a different matter, but I grew up in quite a diverse environment, had lots of different communities around us, and So yeah, I chose to come to up north. I currently live in Huddersfield, so I came up here for university and just fell in love with the place and met my partner and decided to stay here. I think my parents always wanted me back because I think everyone, or even now, I've been up here, living up here for about 15, just around 15 odd years, and every time they ask when am I coming back, my friends, my family, they all ask when am I coming back home. So it's part of me does miss it. Part of me misses that closeness and that support network. But I'm quite settled and I'm quite happy up here, and the fact that you can go out and see some greenery, which is not always possible in London. That's what kept me here.
Hmm. Do you find it very different culturally?
Yeah, yeah, there's a big cultural difference. I think for me, the biggest thing is that I'm not necessarily involved in much as the like our family get-togethers and stuff like that. Even though I do try and get down there as much as possible and spend as much time as I can. I'm quite limited as to how often I can, partly because of work, partly because of my wife's work. So in that sense, I miss out on a lot of it, and because I come from a Hindu background, so there's a lot of celebrations and events are always happening which I can't be a part of, and I've just not found it up here. It's a shame, and trust me, the food. I'm a big foodie, so I miss my home cooking, the variety and the options of foods that you can eat down there as well. There's something from every culture, every background, whereas up here you're quite limited to what you can find. And I guess you can go to big cities to find that, but I'm a bit of a homeboy, so I like to stay at home, stay in my own little environment, and shut the world out.
Hmm. What's the town like that you live in? Like, how big is it?
I'd say it's probably one of the bigger towns in the UK. Um, it's very much a university town, so the population literally goes up by 25-50% when it's term time and stuff like that. So in that sense, it's really good because there's a nice little buzz when it's term time. But like most towns, it shuts down around 10, 11 o'clock. So if you want to go out at night, yeah, you can go to the clubs, but I'm kind of past that now. Not as young as I used to be, so clubbing doesn't interest me as much. I don't mind doing it once in a blue moon, but it has to be once in a blue moon. It's not like you can't go out. I think you're up at midnight thinking, I just fancy something to eat. You can't literally go out and get a decent meal at midnight, whereas you can in London. There's always something
Yeah.
happening, and there's always somewhere to go there. And I guess the
And where?
people as well. Sorry.
Sorry, go on.
I guess the people are different as well because you don't get that variety up here as you do down in London, whereas it's very much yeah. I don't know how to explain it. You just don't. London is so big. It's so different to anywhere else in the country that I've ever been, and I'm sure you get the same thing in big cities like Manchester, Birmingham, whatnot. But yeah, this is a little town. I like to think of it as sleepy, but I guess if you ask anybody that's been born and raised in Huddersfield, it's not sleepy at all. But for me, it is in comparison.
Hmm. And where in India is your family? I just went there for the first time
Where
last
from?
month.
Oh wow, whereabouts did you go?
I flew into Delhi and that I was trekking in the Himalayas, so in Ladakh.
Oh wow.
And I
No,
just had one day in Delhi, so
yeah, no, we're from West India, like the state of Gujarat, and I'd say it's different to the rest of the country because Gujarat is like a vegetarian state. So yeah, now you probably in the big cities you might get like a few meaty restaurants and stuff, but generally speaking, it's a dry state and it's a vegetarian state, so you don't necessarily get the variety of meals as you would do in other parts. Um, but the food is amazing.
huh.
Yeah.
And is it mainly Hindu?
Sorry?
Is the main religion Hindu there?
Yeah, yeah, it's Hindi. Like, I'm from a little farming village. Um, so yeah, it is. The majority of us are Hindus. We do, because we border Pakistan, or part of the state borders Pakistan. We do have quite a few Muslims in our village and stuff. But yeah, I'd say 90% of it is Hindu.
Hindi, yeah, sorry. Hindu's the language.
Hindi's the language, Hindu's the religion.
Oh, oh my God. Okay.
Yeah.
Brain not working today. Yeah, it's, I mean, I mean, I need to go back there because it's like, I just saw one tiny, it's like so interesting, right? Like the part I was in, it's so different because it's close to, there's like a lot of Tibetan immigrants there, but it's close to China. It's like, yeah, it's like the food's, but it seems like every state, it's like, yeah, so many different languages, food, people, all different. Such a interesting place.
Yeah, when we were little, when we used to go visit, we've done a little bit of travelling, and definitely you do get to learn the different types of cuisines depending on where you're from. And because the majority of my family are still in India, the majority of them are still in the village or the surrounding villages, so they've not emigrated that far. So it's quite surreal going back there because it's still, I don't know, it feels like you're going back in time a little bit. And even though I know it's not like that anymore, it still feels like that when I do go back. But it's just like when I go there, it just gives a sense of calmingness as well. Even traveling around India, you get to see the hustle and bustle of the big cities and stuff like that, and it can be a bit intimidating if you're not used to it. But I like to think of my little village as like a Sleepy Hollow almost.
Yeah. And so how did you get involved in mental health work?
I've always wanted to get into this type of work, even from a little kid. It was really early on in my childhood that I wanted to be some sort of counsellor or something, and I always say this story when people ask that question. I remember reading some of my old school reports, and I put it in there. It must have only been about 10 or something, that I wanted to be like a child psychologist or a counsellor or something along those lines. So ever since then, that's all I've ever wanted to do. And I don't know what clicked in my head at that age or what drove me into that profession, but I've always known it's something that I'm going to do. And when as soon as I turned 18, I started to volunteer for the Samaritans, and that was my first ever real foray into mental health, and it was a bit of an eye-opener. I thought I knew what I was getting into, but early on in those days when I was still a naive little 18-year-old thinking I could save the world, working for the Samaritans really showed me what I was getting into, and it was something that I really wanted to do. So I ended up volunteering for them for about 10, 12 years, I think. And then from then, I went to college, went to uni, and then started to work in a charity called Place to Be, where they offered counselling in primary schools. Yeah, so from there, then that's where I learned about Shout and decided to join them as well. But it was definitely from a young age. I don't know why, but this is something that I feel quite passionate about and something that I've always wanted to do. And I think it was the Samaritans that really pushed me into the suicide area as well, because a lot of the contacts or a lot of the people that contact Samaritans are suicidal, and it's about supporting somebody in the last moments.
And hopefully not the last moments.
Yeah. Excuse me.
So Samaritans, is that a phone line?
Yeah, when I started way back when, it was predominantly it was telephone contact, so it was totally anonymous. So they phone in, they talk to you about anything, and you're there to support and listen. But they did start they were doing emails at the same time, as well as getting involved in text messaging. But it was still when I was there, it was still relatively new. And unfortunately, they've focused on other areas now. So I don't think they offer any text messaging, but they still do offer email support as well as the telephone support. And I think they do web chats now. But the majority of it was telephone. So again, because it's a 24-hour service, it was I was expected to do night shifts as well. But I think there's something quite humbling about supporting somebody when they are at the darkest. I don't mean just suicide or anything like that. It's any time that somebody reaches out, their distress has got to that level where they are actively asking you for help or are asking somebody for help, to whether it's to listen, to support them, to help them formulate some sort of action plan to get ongoing support. But I find it really humbling that you're the person that they've turned to as an organization or as an individual, that they either don't have nobody else or they trust you enough to actually have their back when they are at the depths.
And do you remember one of the earliest, like you mentioned, it being eye-opening? Do you remember some of those early experiences?
Yeah, I do. And like I said, I was quite young when I first started. So the training that the Samaritans offered was really, really good. It really did prepare you for, or it tried to prepare you for what you were going to be dealing with. And the training, it didn't shy away from some of the more distressing content that you might hear. But all I remember was that some of the earlier calls where I was on the phone, I remember just coming off of it and thinking, what have I let myself in for? And am I prepared or am I able to manage this? Because one thing to remember is that every time you're supporting somebody, it does take a little bit out of you, whether in terms of the emotional support that you're offering them. You have to be there. You're putting everything else that's going on in your life on hold, and it takes a lot of concentration and a lot of brain power and a lot of emotional resilience to actually support somebody. And that side of things, I don't know whether I was fully prepared for. Even though we had discussed it, I didn't know the impact it was going to have on me. So I remember coming off of some of my early shifts and just feeling drained, just totally emotionally drained. And I think that's where I relied on my family to support me a bit, even though I didn't talk to them about it, because I was getting the supervision and the support from the other Samaritans on shift and my shift leaders. But just my family knowing that I've done a shift and then I might not be chatty or willing to sit and chill with them or anything like that. But I just might need my own space to decompress, and they were supportive in that sense. But the support that I got from Samaritans during those early days was, you can't knock it. They were there, because a lot of the people that had been doing it, they've been doing it for a number of years, especially the ones that I was on shift with. They paired me up with some experienced volunteers, so they knew what to look out for, and they knew what I needed because they'd been through something similar when they first started. And I thought that was really, really, it got me through some of the toughest calls that I probably had.
Mm-hmm. And was the training, is it similar to Shout in that the training is about, or how you speak to someone it's a lot about reflecting back what they're saying and gently asking questions, but not constantly asking questions because that's like interrogation, and then not ever giving advice, like unsolicited advice. It's just kind of gently helping them to figure out the next steps on their own.
Yeah. The Samaritans training is all in person, whereas Shout training is online. So they do teach you how to listen in a different way, and they do teach you to, just like Shout do, they teach you the certain types of language to listen out for, or the signs to pick up on if there's something else that you do need to explore. And one thing that both Shout and Samaritans do that is amazing is they ask and they specify using the word suicide rather than dressing it up in any other way. So there is no confusion about it, and giving them that permission that it's an okay topic to discuss. Whether they are feeling suicidal or not, just by using that language and using the words, and not trying to shy away from being open and honest about it, it gives the other person the permission to say, actually, they do want to help, they do understand, or they know they are listening to me, they are picking up on some of the things. So I always find that people's you can never plant the seed in somebody's head. If somebody is suicidal, the thought is always there, and whether they want to admit it to themselves or whether it's too scary to say it, they've got their own reasons for not using that word. And if they do, that's great, because everyone knows what's going on and you know what support is needed at that point. But when they don't, it's up to you as the supporter, the listener, or whatever capacity you're supporting them in, whether it's they're a friend, that you're acting as a professional or whatnot. Just saying it gives them permission to talk about it.
Yeah, I remember learning that it's like people worry if exactly what you said about planting a seed. It's like that if you mention the word suicide, that suddenly, yeah, it's gonna make them, I don't know, that it's the wrong thing to do. Whereas it was, yeah, it's important early on to ask that question. So if there's the suggestion, you know, that it's like things are so hard, I don't know how I can do it anymore, and then asking, when you say that, have you experienced suicidal thoughts? And then I guess from there the conversation either goes like yes, and then it goes to the ladder up assessment, which would be great if you can explain that in a sec. Or otherwise it's like, yeah, it's just like no, nothing like that, but X, Y, and Z. Or, you know, or they might say I've been self-harming or something, which is another thing that would be great if we could talk about, because that was something that I didn't have any familiarity with, even though I'd experienced losing someone to suicide. Self-harm is a whole different thing, which I think a lot of people don't realise that either.
Excuse me. Yeah, what I believe about suicide, I think everyone at some point in their life will have thought about ending their life. Well, the majority of people, not everyone. I'm not going to make a blanket statement like that. I think there's a lot of people that will have had that thought. It could be a fleeting thought. It could be something that occupies your every waking moment. And it's when those thoughts start to develop into plans, into accessing the means, and to actually acting upon them. And that's what we try and do at Shout with the ladder up. So we do ask the question. We ask if they've had thoughts and whether those thoughts have led to plans, and whether they've actually planned how they're going to do it, and do they have access to the means. And then if they've got access to the means, we want to know if they've thought about when they would do it, whether they've thought about a time, or they're planning to do it now, or have they already started. At Shout we get about 15 to 2,000 calls a day, 1,500 to 2,000 calls a day, and 35% of them will have some form of suicidal thought. Now, not all of them will ladder up and act on them or have any intention of acting on them, but just having the thoughts can be just as distressing. It's something that, is such a taboo in society, and it shouldn't be. Mental health, there's a big push on trying to get people to have conversations, and it's great if you've got people in your life that can. But if you don't, then that's where services like Shout come in. We we're there 24/7, and the majority of people have a phone, and you can text our number whenever you want, and nobody else needs to know about it. It's Whereas if you're talking to somebody, there's always the thought of, just as I experienced this on Samaritans, that somebody could come in the room and the phone will go down because they don't want other people to hear, and that's not, as a society, that's not where we should be. We should be open and honest about how we feel. It's it's the biggest sign of strength, and people believe that talking about it is a sign of weakness. Well, it's not. It's a sign of strength. It's one of the hardest things in the world is to do is to ask for help. But that's why services like Shout are needed, though, as everyone can access it. We're trying to make it accessible to everyone as well. We've had texters as young as 8 reaching out, and we've had people as in the 70s and 80s wanting help. So it shows that mental health doesn't just affect a certain age group; it affects everyone.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, just to make the distinction, I guess it's so Shout is text. So
Yeah,
you text in to a number, which I can provide the number in the show notes for anyone who needs it. And so you text in, and then the volunteers are sitting behind a computer typing back to you. Whereas then, yeah, there are other things like Samaritans, which are you can talk over the phone.
yeah, and we're grateful for everyone that gives up their time and volunteers for Shout, because without our volunteers, we'll always struggle. So it's we can't really have think about 2,500 volunteers, and for as yourself, you can do it from anywhere. As long as you've got a decent internet connection, there's specialist online training. There's a lot of support out there for everybody that volunteers will have a clinically trained supervisor and to support them on the shifts, and they'll have access to coaches off the platform if they need any additional help as well. So we really do care about our volunteer community, because without them, we wouldn't be able to deliver our service. And it's, I always find that it's not easy to have a conversation about mental health and about what you're struggling with, and I know for a fact I struggled as a child, because I'm sure during my teenage years, when I said that was a bit of a tearaway, that I was probably going through some difficulty myself, whether that be depression or whatnot. And I struggled to reach out. I struggled to actually ask for help. And it's only since I look back on my life that I think the help was there. Maybe I didn't know how to access it, or maybe I was too caught up in, toxic masculinity to actually realize that I needed it. So yeah, in that respect, having something like Shout would have been ideal, because I had a phone, I could have texted, I could have kept it private.
And
But
how did you? Sorry, go on.
I think it wasn't until I came to university that I realized that I needed help. Then I accessed because I'd done a counselling course, and part of that was to actually access your own therapy as well. And even to this day, I still do speak to a therapist if I need to, and I'm I'm quite an advocate of the type of mental health support that is out there. And I know at the moment with wait times, we've just coming out of the pandemic, some of the wait times that people are waiting for is quite long, and there are months, and it's a shame that you have to wait. But in the meantime, whilst you're waiting, reaching out to other forms, identifying people in your life that you can talk to if you do have those. If not, reach out to services, speak about your mental health as much as you can to the right people and the people that you trust, or services that are there to support you, because the longer you leave reaching out for help, the harder it gets to ask because it just becomes more and more of a, I don't know, almost like a darkness that surrounds you and you can't see a way forward. And yeah, I always think of it in terms of you're walking down the street and you find a stone, you put it in your pocket. And then you walk further, and then that one stone becomes two stones, becomes 10 stones, and it becomes harder to walk. Whereas it's easy to take two or three stones out of your pocket than it is 10 to 15. And that's what it just, ill mental health has a way of just dragging you down without you realizing. And the sooner you ask for help, the better it is. And I'm not going to say it's easier to get to overcome it or to learn to live with it, but it may be easier to talk about it rather and prevent something rather than look for the cure. If that makes sense.
Yeah, because what I find I've dealt with depression over the last 3 years. And what I find is the deeper you go into it, the more you feel like that you're alone and like no one. It's very, very hard to reach out because you feel like you feel like you're worthless, like no one wants to hear from you and no one cares about you. And I think that's the thing with suicide that people don't understand, when there are still people who say things like that it's selfish and, it's like the person in that place doesn't see any other option. It's really, and that's, what I really learned to shout, talking to people who might be in this situation. It's like, this is their luck. That's the only way out for that. Like, that's the only possible solution they see at that point. It's often like you believe it's like that the world would be better without you. So it's actually like the complete opposite of selfish. But
Yeah, and suicide sounds like the final act. And I always think to myself that what has led to this person taking their own life, and it's one of those topics where you can ask 10 different people and you could get 10 different answers as to why somebody would do so. However, if one of those 10 people were to actually sit down and talk to the person before they took their life, that's what it could take for somebody to change their mind. So, and the difficulty with suicide is you never know it's happening. You could never see it coming. It affects anyone and everyone. You could be you can be the person that's got the biggest smile in the world. You could be the center of the party. You can be that extrovert. However, you can still be hurting on the inside, as well as you could be the person that sits in the dark all the time and still be the happiest person. So you never know who is suicidal unless you ask and unless you talk to people. Yeah, I don't know how else to say it. It's about trying to connect with people again, and it's a for somebody to be in that depth, the darkness that they must be going through, where we all could do something to make the world a better place, just by having a simple conversation, really.
And I think going back to what we were talking about before with the distinction between, that it is this ladder. So you might have someone who's thinking about, who has thought about, that's a potential solution, or like, I don't want to exist anymore. Life's too hard. And that's kind of the very bottom. And then it can go on to, okay, if then I did this, how would I do it? And then from there, then it's like, okay, do I have the means? And then what's the time frame? And then that's when it's like an emergency situation, if someone's figured out how they would do it and when they're going to do it. But on the bottom level, which is where I've been and which is where that feedback, that listener who kind of prompted this conversation has been, and where I think, a lot of people who have experienced depression have been, which is just, I just don't want to exist anymore. Like, life's too hard, it's too painful. I think especially after, well, it could just be during depression, but it could be, after a breakup or after a loss of employment or some kind of big thing. But people, I think it's even scary at that level to talk about it, because people, I guess, who have never experienced that find that scary and then think that they can't deal with that, and then that they're like, oh my God, then it becomes worrying for the person who's experiencing that people are going to think they are like crazy or insane and need to be in an asylum, or it's kind of this, there's all these other things that then lead the person to think, well, I'm just not going to tell anyone because I don't want this kind of overreaction, or I don't know anyone who will understand this, because even though I know I'm safe, like it's almost, like that shame and that judgment that you're worried how people are going to react just by expressing how difficult you're finding things.
Yeah, we see that amongst our texters quite a lot, that they don't want to burden somebody, or they look at other people's lives other people in their lives and think they've got too much going on themselves, and that adds to the isolation that they're feeling. Whereas that can be part of the suicidal thought pattern, where you feel that you're not worthy enough of somebody else's help. Whereas, we all are worthy, and we all need help from different time to time. Whether the other person has experienced something similar to what you're going through now or not, at some point in their life, they needed help for something. Whether it's the mental health, or whether it's learning a new job, or whatever it is. So they know what it feels like to ask for help and receive the help that they needed. Just the same way as that somebody who's struggling with suicidal ideation or depression or mental health issues, asking for help for that is hard. Yeah, it is. But there are people out there that can do it. And there are people out there that do want to help. And if you can't find that person in your life, or you don't want to, don't stop knocking on doors, because there will be somebody out there for you. And it takes a lot of time and effort. Sometimes it may seem like a too big a mountain to climb, but just by asking one person, you've already made a big difference in your life, because you've shown the strength that you need to ask.
Yeah, and I guess also knowing that you're not, because that's the other feeling, is that you can feel like you're the only one experiencing this, when it's like, unfortunately, so many people experience these types of feelings. But I think knowing that helps you, and I guess that's the whole point of this podcast, so people can realize they're not alone, and they can get through these things and get through to the other side.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing to remember, that over 5,000 people in the UK take their own life every year. And so that's a minimum of 5,000 people that actually have felt what you're feeling. But the amount of people that have suicidal ideation or think about it or attempt it, that we don't know the full fact of what that number could be because a lot of it goes unreported. So there are other people that are experiencing what you're going through, and there are just as many people that are getting the support and find ways to live with it. Because just because you've got the help once doesn't mean you're not going to need it again. And unfortunately, it's really, we're quite good at going to the doctors if we've got a pain in our back or a pain in our leg or anything. But when we've got a pain in our own mind, or I don't know where mental health is in the body, unfortunately, but if you're struggling with mental health, for some reason we don't treat it the same as any other ailment that we suffer from, which does need to change. And hopefully stuff that you're doing with this podcast and what hundreds of other people are doing out there as well, whether it's through charities or mental health talks, TED Talks, whatever way they're doing it, it's where we're shifting. I've seen that in my own lifetime, that it's the message about having that conversation is getting out there, but we need people to start talking.
Yeah, and I think even things like you admitting, or it shouldn't even be admitting, but just talking openly about, teenage years and struggling and behaving in this way, and then saying, actually, no, I'm going to go and talk to someone. It's like, that's just sharing things like that, especially, I think, for men who are typically less open about these things, is so important for, just for the feeling that it's like, there's nothing, you're not some weird person that's totally, it's like you can, just like, just so many people experience this and they get help, and you can as well.
And I think that is important. Like, men tend to internalize, and I'm being quite general here, men tend to internalize their own struggles, or they tend to find other ways to try and manage it, whether that's through alcohol, drugs. I know a lot of people do struggle with that, but they don't talk. And I'd admit it, even in my own friendship group, maybe we don't talk about mental health enough, or we don't talk about how we're doing or how we're feeling enough. Because I'm sure some of my own friends might have been struggling with depression or suicidality within their own life, but I admit I might not be the best of friends. Maybe I don't ask that. However, I do ask how they're feeling, whether they choose to open up to me or not. And it might just be, just going down the pub and having a pint and just chatting in general and stuff like that, and noticing little things. If I see a change in their behaviour or change in their mood or something, I'll ask them if everything's alright. And whether they choose to tell me or choose to tell somebody else, just asking that question will let them know that you're okay to talk about it if they ever want to. It's not saying that every time you meet them is you're going to have that chat. If they want to talk about it, that's great. It's not you pushing the issue. It's you being open to them coming to you.
And I think it's just showing you care, right? Because I think people find it, especially, people who are private, and they think if this person wanted to talk to me about this breakup, for example, they would tell me, and I don't want to pry. But it's like, it's not about prying, it's just about saying, it's a way to say, I care about you. So it's like just checking in, saying, how are you going? And that can be enough for the person to know that they're not alone and that someone cares about them. And that can almost be enough sometimes, I think.
Yeah, and you mentioned about the different scenarios like breakups, change of jobs or losing your job or anything like that. And that's where a lot of this boils down to is some form of loss that they've experienced, whether it's a loss of identity. With a breakup, it could become a loss of social support. You know, when you always hear about whether you're in camp A or camp B when somebody breaks up or if something happens, but why can't you just be in camp C and be there for both of them? Because choosing one camp or the other, somebody is always going to lose out on a lot of support that they once had. And it's that loss that affects you deeply. That's what can start it. By talking about that loss, you're stopping it from developing into something bigger. Um, and it's any type of loss, whether it's like we said, it's it could it could be a loss of a relative or a friend or a pet. I think we don't always understand or pay significance to the value that animals or our pets have. They are a member of your family. You look after them like a child. Um, and that's something that I want. That's something that was always instilled in me when I first done my training at Samaritans. That somebody could be calling you because they lost a pet goldfish, but that pet goldfish could have been the whole life. That could have been the social support. That could have been the emotional support. So don't be as dismissive and what somebody's going through because you don't know how important something is to them until they've lost it. And it could be as something as simple as a pair of shoes or the favorite jeans have got a hole in them. That those sort of sentimental items have a lot of meaning to somebody who that could have been that could have been the pair of trousers that they were wearing when the child was born or when they met their partner or something. And we can't sit there and make assumptions about what has meaning to somebody. So when something happens that you don't understand, don't jump to the conclusion of it just being a silly little thing because it can have a hell of a lot more.
So, what tips would you have for someone who's, because I think you hear this all the time. For example, like they've lost someone in their life, and people often say they have a cancer diagnosis or something, and people often say, I think people who experience the loss say, I was so disappointed that people were just awkward around me and didn't know how to talk to me. And then people on the other side say, I'm really thinking of this person who lost their sister, for example, but I just don't know what to say to them. Like, I don't know how to ask, and I just don't want to upset them, so I just avoid it.
I think when you're having a conversation or you don't know how to approach somebody, it sounds silly, but do what you would normally do. You don't necessarily have to change the way you treat them because that makes things a bit more difficult. If you call them, I don't know, Jim Bob every day of your life, every time you meet them, why would you change it to Jimmy? Because therefore you're putting what they've gone through before them, but they're still an individual. They might not be, they're going through something difficult. So they may not be wanting to do the same things you used to do, but you shouldn't have to change the way you talk to them just because of the circumstances that they're going through, because they still want you as a friend. They still want you as that person there. Yeah, you may have a different conversation, and that's the difference. You have a different conversation, but you don't necessarily change. It does see them as the person, if that makes sense, because they're still that same person that they were 2 days ago, 2 weeks ago. They're still the same person that you were out going shopping with or going out for a meal with or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
be there and just genuinely be there and just ask them how they are and just keep that sense of belonging is what they need at that time when they're struggling and they're feeling isolated. So by you tiptoeing around them, it draws attention to something different. When they're going through something different. They're not different themselves. They're going through something different, and that's the difference. There's the event and there's the person. And I think
Hmm.
that's what I've always tried to do, and that's what I'll continue trying to do is separating the circumstances from the person. Yeah, they may want to talk about circumstances, so be there and listen to them for that.
And can you explain the process of how someone, so going back to shout or something like a Samaritan's call, when someone's kind of in that crisis, high emotion that causes them to reach out, what is the process for them to then talk through it and get to a point when they've calmed down?
Generally
And,
speaking, when somebody's reaching out for you, they'll be at a heightened level of emotion state. They'll be in a high state of emotion. So they may have the mind might be racing, they might have a million and one things going on, or they'll have 10 different issues that they're trying to deal with at the same time. Trying to knuckle down, there's no way you can fix everything for everyone by yourself. You'll always need support. So highlighting the one thing that is causing the most distress and focusing on that, or highlighting the one thing that they feel they can control, or that will give them the most relief in that moment. Whether that actually be the mental health issue that they're struggling with, or whether that could be um, trying to figure out how they're going to get to work tomorrow morning because the car's broken down. So whatever they want is to start focus on one thing rather than trying to fix everything or try and support them with everything, because that will give them the headspace to focus on everything else because they've got the support you need. And it's about being honest about you as a caregiver, as a helper, knowing your own limits as well. So if you're going to commit to something, if you're going to say, I'll take you shopping every week, make sure you can do, because don't overcommit and say, I'll take you shopping every day. Be honest about what you can, because if they're coming to you and you're going to be part of their care plan or their actions going forward, you need to be consistent with the help that you can offer. And if even if that means saying, look, I can't do this, I can help you find the people that you need. And, if ever you feel like this, I'm always willing to talk to you about it, or I can talk to you on certain days, or whatever your commitment is, but being honest and not overcommitting about what you can do yourself. So it's about trying to build a little mini community around them, whether like that's little supportive community. So identifying people and helping them have that conversation with those people. So it could be, I wish I could speak to my mum or my dad, or I wish I knew how to book an appointment with the GP, or I need help with that, and making that little safety plan, care plan, whatever you want to call it, and helping them identify the people that they need around them and where to get that help from. And it might not be done in one conversation. One conversation you might have just helped them think, actually, I feel slightly better today for getting it off my chest. Can we talk about it tomorrow or in a couple of days when I've had time to reflect? And then we can look at what my next steps are. And it might be a couple of, sometimes it can take 10 minutes to do that. Sometimes it can take 10 hours to do that. Just make sure you're looking after yourself as well. And
Mhm.
I think that's it. You can't help somebody else if you're struggling yourself, in terms of you can't keep pouring from an empty jug. So make sure you're looking after yourself and make sure they know what you can do and what you can't do, and help them identify where they can go and who they can talk to, and find a way of supporting them to do that, whether that is making the initial phone call.
Mhm.
So if you're sitting in front of somebody, sitting in the park, and you sit chatting to your mate saying, you know, I think I need to speak to my doctor, m- do it there and then. Why leave it for tomorrow? Tomorrow they might have forgotten, or tomorrow they might not feel as that like they've got the confidence to do it. So they say they need to speak to a doctor, phone the doctor, try and get them that appointment if it's possible. Or phone their friend or phone whoever that they need to do. But make sure it gets done that day. So, yeah, it's, I don't know. It might just be about being consistent as well. And making sure that
Yeah.
they know that they've got the support there.
Yeah. Because, yeah, I guess that's the other thing that really stuck out to me from training. It's like you're not, and I think this is what happens a lot in relationships and things as well. Like sometimes people just need to talk and know that there's someone there to help them kind of think through stuff, but they're not asking for solutions. And I think often people can find, you know, it's like so classic that friends say this with their partner. They just come home and they need to vent about something, and then the other person's like, oh, like, okay, well, why don't you do this? And like, maybe you should quit your job. Maybe you should do this. And it's like, no, like, I'm not asking for that. Like, I'm just asking for someone to listen. But I think that's also like a tendency we have. It's like when someone's struggling, you really want to help them. So you just want to tell them like all the advice you possibly have and everything you've tried, and like, oh, maybe you should try this. But it's like, you can't do that because, well, you don't know really everything that's going on with that person, and often they might already know what they need to do. Like they want to talk to a doctor, but they just don't know how. So it's like, that's how you can help by helping them figure that out. But to suggest like, oh, I think you need to go to a doctor, that's not, if they haven't brought that up, like that's not helpful.
No, because then you're just imparting what you would do onto them, and they're not you, and you're not them. So at Shout, we always go along the lines that a texter knows themselves best, and like you said, they'll have an idea of what sort of things they want to help with. So if we can go by what they bring, then I guess that's one of the best things that they can do, because then they're in control. They're taking ownership rather than being told what to do. If they can help with those next steps, and that's the most important thing, because then once they start taking ownership of it, it belongs to them, rather than somebody imparting their own personal view or their own authority over them. Because I only know myself. I've grown up with my family and stuff like that, but I don't know them like they know themselves. Nobody knows themselves like themselves at the end of the day. So listen to what they want to do. And I think your example was amazing. Like, friends saying you should do this, you should do that. What happens when it goes wrong? Who are you going to blame? You're going to blame your friend because they're the ones that told me to do that. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's all I can say is it sounds silly and it sounds so simple, but it's one of the hardest skills to have, is to listen. And listening isn't about waiting for somebody else to jump in. And I think that the tendency as humans, we do have that because we want to fix, we want to rescue, and that's when it starts becoming a bit dangerous, when you do want to do all those things. Whereas listening is about being present in a conversation and just allowing somebody, it's about creating a safe space for somebody to talk openly, honestly, without judgment. And it becomes harder when you're emotionally involved with somebody or you have an emotional connection with somebody, because you can see and you just want to take that pain away almost. But that's, it's something that you can only get better at. I don't think I've ever met somebody that's got worse at listening. The more that you do it, the easier it becomes.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, that's also for things as simple as something to calm, if you're just having if you're heightened emotion or having a stressful day, and it's like you need some kind of activity to calm down, which could be like going for a walk going into nature or doing a meditation or music or something. But to suggest like you have to help the person, everyone knows the thing that helps them calm down, but by telling someone else, like you can't really guess that about someone else. So for someone, like meditating might be like some thing that they've never done, and that's like scary to them. Whereas they, playing the piano or cooking or something is their thing. But yeah, that was when I was kind of, my whole depression was caused at work. I was burnt out from just overworking, not sleeping, in the office till 4 a.m. and whatever. And I access some kind of mental health support through work, and it was like the person said to me, I think you just need to go home tonight and have a bath. And it was like, okay, you are not listening. Like I don't even have time to sleep, let alone have a bath. Like this is like the least helpful advice, because it's just, and also it's like, I'm not someone who has baths to relax. Like that might work for someone else, but my thing is more like, going for a walk. So by just trying to prescribe some self-care type thing as well can leave the person just feeling like isolated and frustrated and like they're not being listened to.
I think self-care is really important, but it has to be, like you said, something that they want to do or that they do. Because my self-care is watching TV, watching sports, or doing something like that. But if somebody told me to go for a walk or meditate, I'd be like, what planet are you on? Don't get me wrong, I walk my dogs, and I like, one of the reasons I stayed in Huddersfield was because of the nature around me. However, when I'm stressed out, that's the last thing I want to do. I always worry that I'm going to bump into someone, then I'm going to have some sort of awkward conversation, and I just want to be left on my own. So, yeah, self-care is important, but don't assume you know what's good for somebody else, because it might not be. And you could lose all the hard work and all the effort you put into supporting somebody by a simple thing like that, because all of a sudden they'll think, actually, you've not been listening, you don't know me, you don't care, you're just wanting to get away from me, you just want me to do something and leave me alone. That could be one of the thoughts that they have. So it's more important for them to actually come up with whatever helps them.
Mm-hmm. And do you mind talking briefly about self-harm? Because that's another thing that I think people don't know a lot about and don't understand, but it can be, helpful to understand the distinction between that. And so it doesn't, that was the thing for me, that it's not necessarily to do with suicide at all. It's more to do with the pain someone's feeling.
And I think that's it. Like, two different types of self-harm. There's non-suicidal self-injury, and there is the suicidal one. So some people may self-harm to end their life, but self-harm can also be a coping mechanism for emotional distress. And when we're looking at non-suicidal self-injury, self-harm could be anything that is intentionally done to cause yourself any sort of hurt. So whether that's cutting, burning, pulling your hair out, banging your head against the wall, it can be anything that's, some people some people say piercings and tattoos are a form of self-identification as well as a form of self-harm. But it's somebody's way of expressing their own distress or their own pain, whatever form of self-harm that they take. And the most important thing is, if somebody is self-harming, is making sure that they have support and they're doing it safely. And doing it safely, it may be, if we're talking about cutting or burning yourself or anything like that, it's making sure they have the means to actually tend to those wounds once they've done it. And making sure they've got clean things to actually harm themselves with. So they're not using dirty blades or dirty knives, or not using lighters that have been lying that they found on the floor that have been, trod on or whatever. It's making sure they have ways to actually support themselves after they've done it, and then helping them work backwards and trying to find a way that they can actually look at alternatives before it gets to the stage where they need to self-harm. Um, yeah, a lot of people, the majority of people will self-harm and they'll never attempt to take their life because they are finding a way to deal with it, and that's what's probably keeping them alive. And one of the worst things you could do, if that is somebody's coping mechanism, is tell them to stop and not help them identify other ways to manage it. If you tell them to stop self-harming and they've got no way to actually express themselves afterwards or manage that pain that they're holding in afterwards, it's only going to make the situation worse because they've got no release. And yeah, there are safer alternatives to harming, but that has to be done, that has to be considered, and it has to be something that the person is willing to try rather than being told to do. If that person is coming to you asking for ways to manage that self-harm, then yeah, you can have that discussion. But just because you see somebody that might have hurt themselves the night before and you say, oh, you should stop that, or being so judgmental about it, is only going to make them feel worse about their actions, and for reaching out, it makes it harder for them to do so.
Hmm.
Mm.
And so what might an alternative coping mechanism look like?
So one of the ways that I like to suggest to people that talk about self-harm is identifying people that they care about. So whether and then getting them to use a pen or something like that, or marker, generally a marker or felt tip, and putting their name on wherever they're harming. So if they tend to cut their legs or cut their arms or something, putting the name on this so they know when they look at that, when they want to do it, they can see the person that they care about and they know that that is somebody that they can go talk to. So it acts as a twofold. It's protecting them from hurting because you don't want to hurt somebody, but then you're giving them that reminder, actually, this person is there for when I feel like this. And I quite find that once. And then when somebody is self-harming, there's two different types of release. One of them is the pain. So the act of actually harming is the pain that actually helps them, or it's the sight of if they're cutting, it's the sight of the blood that gives them that release. So it's trying to replicate those in a safer way. Um, there's the good old one that I think most people would have heard of, is like snapping a band on your wrist. Now, some people say that that's not enough. So use 2 bands, use 3 bands until you can get the relief that you want. Um, and if somebody says that it's the sight of the blood that actually helps when they've cut themselves, then ordering some fake blood online, especially nowadays, it's almost Halloween, so it's going to be 10 to the penny. Everyone's going to be selling it. But yeah, get ordering some fake blood online and then you seeing if that gives you the same release. Or ice cubes, even taking a cold shower, that short, sharp shock, that can give you the same release. And that's quite good for other methods of self-harm, whether it's not just cutting. Yeah, but trying to find any form of alternative way to replicate the pain or replicate the sight, whatever it is. Um, you can get really good tattoo sleeves now, and it might just be using that instead. Putting that on so the part of your body that you tend to cut on is not as accessible. It's just that one little step further that they have to think of or whatnot, or even just drawing on themselves where they would normally do the harm. All those, there's quite a few, and I think there's one called the Butterfly Project. So you put pictures of butterflies on your body to show how actually you're a delicate being and you can be nurtured. Because, butterfly, from the whole metamorphosis of them, going from a caterpillar to a butterfly, it shows that you can grow and you can be something different, you can be something beautiful, and you can get that help.
Hmm.
And yeah, all of those are quite good methods, and there's many more, so just finding the one that works for you. And it's not actually, I lie, it's not finding the one, it's finding the ways. Because sometimes one method might work great one day, the next day it might not be so useful. So actually having a arsenal of different things and sticking with them. Sometimes you may need to do it 2 or 3 times to find the release. But having more than one method is always advisable because, different days, different moods, different activities, they have different effects on us.
And what advice would you give someone who's noticed someone's doing this, but they're not sure whether they should talk to the person about it or what they should do?
Definitely ask them and don't be shocked. Don't go in thinking, oh, you need to stop doing this, or oh, I can't believe you're doing this, or don't show no disgust at it, because they are trying to find a way to cope, and that's one of the hardest things to do. So just be supportive. Don't be judgmental. Do just ask about them, and ask when, be there for when they want to talk as well, and support them. If you feel you can be that person that they can call, be that person and make that offer. However, if they never want to talk to you, that's fine, but you can still support them, and just by being there with them, being somebody important in their life that they can rely on, can be just as helpful. Like I think we said it earlier, nobody, you don't always need to talk about something, but knowing you can talk about it can bring you the same amount of relief. And I think that's the main thing, is like having access to that support is almost as good as having that support in itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's so important, is knowing you're not judging them.
Yeah.
I just remember I guess it must happen at schools a lot, and it's people don't necessarily know how to react, but I guess, the worst thing is creating a sense that that person should feel shame or embarrassment about what they've done, and that people are talking about them or something like that.
And I think that's it as well, especially when especially at schools, there's a lot of pressure on young people, and they are learning about themselves, they're finding out about themselves, they're going through a hell of a lot, just biologically, and it can be worrying to think that whatever you do or whatever you say can get out everywhere, and it can be really isolating. So we know, the statistics show that self-harm is very much prominent amongst teenagers. So just make sure that A, if you are self-harming, you're doing it safely, and B, if you are supporting somebody doing it, just make sure you're not judging them or showing it, or I don't know, not just judging them. It's more than just judging them, but it's that shock when somebody tells you that they're self-harming. Try not to be shocked. Remain calm, and just be natural, because like we said, it can be hard to ask for help, and they wanting to ask you, they've identified you as that person that wants to support them. So be supportive, and try not to judge, and try not to act shocked, or try not to impart advice on them, but just find out what they need from you.
Mm-hmm. And I guess if you're not, because I'm just thinking back now to experiencing this when I was at school, and this advice is also helpful. I wish I had it at that time, or that everyone had it, and especially probably the teachers. But I guess if it's something that you don't, someone doesn't feel comfortable intervening, would it be about asking someone else to have that conversation, like an adult, a teacher, the school nurse, or something like that?
Yeah, schools are a fountain of support and knowledge. Most schools now have some form of mental health support, whether that's through a counsellor that works at the school or somebody that gets that support, that comes in to support children. So there will be somebody at school that can support you, and teachers generally do have some form of mental health training, hopefully, or somebody in the school will have some form of mental health training. And we hear it a lot at Shout where people think they could never talk to a teacher because they've been identified as being the naughty child or the one that's always causing trouble or anything. But maybe if there are any teachers listening, maybe they're not being naughty. Maybe they've just not found the language, or maybe that's their way of actually asking for help. So, people behave in a certain way for a certain reason. Rather than looking at that behavior, try and look at what that behavior is saying about them.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and all it takes is one person to actually ask the right question at the right time. You never know. You can change the trajectory of that person's life.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's so. Yes, yeah, because I don't know if I explained that properly, but I'm just now having this vivid memory of a girl who was self-harming at school, but it's like, yeah, I really hope there was, like, I feel bad that I wasn't the person who, but I guess I didn't have the skills to be able to have that conversation and to ask, and I didn't understand, and I probably was judging her, but I think that's why this is so important. So people, because there are always a lot of people who care, right? But it's like they don't know what to do. And so then they might do
Mm.
nothing. And then that's how we, yeah, lose so many people to suicide or just have so many people who continue to suffer. But but yeah, I think these tips are so helpful for people to, if they're witnessing this, to just be able to, it's nothing crazy that you have to do. It's just as simple as
Mm.
asking that person if they're okay.
Yeah, and it does sound simple. It's just asking if people are okay, and we do that. Like I always think back. How many times are you asked, "How are you?" or "How are you doing today?" And it's so easy and it's so natural just to say, "I'm okay, I'm fine." But if you're not fine, it can be the hardest thing to say, and nobody ever expects somebody to say, "No, I'm not fine." But if we did start saying that, the conversation would be so different. And, maybe that's the conversation that we need to have. Maybe we need to be a bit more honest with ourselves as well. And it may just seem like a polite question, but when was the last time that we actually said that to somebody and didn't expect that response?
Hmm.
So maybe next time you say that, genuinely ask the question.
Yeah.
You never know. Because I'm not going to sit here and say I asked the question and expect a different response. But if somebody was to say they're not fine, how would you react?
Mm.
Mm. I think
Yeah.
that's what we do at Shout. We ask the questions that somebody else might not necessarily ask. So it's nice when we get the odd conversation where people have texted us to thank us for the support they gave us, or we get that feedback, and that's always welcome. And I love those sort of conversations because you genuinely do realise that just by asking questions that other people don't necessarily ask, you are doing something different.
Hmm. Well, this has all been so helpful. Is there is there anything else you wanted to add that we didn't cover?
No, I think I've shared quite a lot, and I think we've had a really good conversation. So I really want to thank you for inviting me along, and I hope we see some of your listeners as our volunteers one day. And you
Hmm.
know, if anything, the only thing I would say actually is please talk to each other a bit more, and don't be scared about having that conversation because somebody needs it, and more often than not, it's somebody that you know.